Before we begin today's classified case file, I urge you to subscribe to this channel. The Imperium holds countless secrets, and each video we bring you another forbidden investigation from the darkest corners of the galaxy. Now, settle in as we examine case file 4077 Sigma, the Kryptonian incident. The message arrived at my fortress on Gudrun during the festival of the Emperor's Ascension. I am Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn of the Ordo Xenos, and I had been celebrating with my retinue when the astropathic distress beacon pierced through the warp from mining colony Ferrum 7. The message was simple and terrifying. Everyone had vanished. I assembled my team immediately. Magos Dahan, my tech priest advisor, began his binaric prayers to the machine spirits of our ship. The Essene, my gun servitor Barbarisator, performed his pre-flight weapons diagnostics with mechanical precision, and Godwin Fishig, my interrogator and oldest friend, checked his bolt pistol with the grim efficiency of a man who had seen too many horrors. The journey through the warp took 3 days. 3 days of wondering what could make an entire colony disappear without a trace. Demon incursion? Genestealer cult? Something worse? When we broke atmosphere over Ferrum 7, the world seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. The hab block stood intact. Mining equipment sat idle but undamaged. But there were no people. Not a single soul on the Vox channels. Not a single heat signature on our Auspex scanners. Dahan's mechanical voice crackled through my Vox bead with unusual energy readings from the western wastes, residual heat signatures consistent with atmospheric entry. What we found defied explanation. A crater, easily 100 meters across, still glowing with residual energy. Scorch marks radiated outward in perfect circles, as if something had descended with controlled fury. But this was no meteorite impact, and no ship signature appeared on our scanners. Fishik found the survivor. Willem Pontius, the colony's mining foreman, huddled in a sub-level storage compartment. The man was shaking, his eyes wide with something beyond fear. Something closer to religious awe. I knelt beside him gently. He needed to feel safe before he could tell us what had happened. His voice came out in broken gasps, describing how 3 days ago something fell from the sky with purpose, with control. They watched through magnification scopes from the mining platform as a pod made of crystal and metal opened, and a man emerged, but not a man. He was tall, impossibly perfect, wearing strange blue and red clothing with a symbol they didn't recognize, an S of some kind. The colonial guards approached with laser guns ready, standard first contact protocol. But when Commander Hayes ordered the stranger to identify himself, the stranger moved faster than their eyes could follow. One moment he was standing in the crater, the next he was 20 meters away. Pontius's words tumbled faster as he described how Hayes fired a warning shot, and the stranger raised his hands defensively. His eyes glowed red, bright red like molten metal, and heat poured from them, melting Hayes's laser gun in his hands. The stranger fled into the wilderness faster than any vehicle they had, but before he left, Pontius heard him shout something. A word. Rao. Some Xenos god, perhaps, and then everyone started disappearing. One by one, they just vanished. Pontius hid, afraid that whatever took them would take him too. I stood, processing this information. A being of immense power, clearly not human, yet displaying fear and confusion rather than aggression. This required investigation. While Dahan examined the crater with Barbarisator, I helped Pontius to the surface and had him evacuated to our ship. 2 hours later, Dahan's findings left me speechless. The pod was buried deep in the crater, its crystalline hull still intact despite the violent entry. The metal was unlike anything in the Imperium's archives. Not orcish scrap, not tau alloy, not even the living metal of the Necrons. This was something else entirely. Dahan's mechadendrites interfaced with the pod's systems, extracting data from information crystals that were remarkably advanced. What he showed me changed everything. The pod belonged to someone named Kal-El, the last survivor of a planet called Krypton. His world had been destroyed by its own sun's collapse, torn apart in a cataclysm that had consumed their entire solar system. His father, a scientist named Jor-El, had built this escape pod and sent his infant son toward a planet called Earth, where the boy would be safe. But something had gone wrong. The pod had been caught in a warp storm, pulled off course, tumbling through the Imperium for decades. During that time, Kal-El had been in stasis, his developing body absorbing radiation from a yellow sun that sustained the pod's life support systems. The radiation had changed him, given him abilities that rivaled the Emperor's own custodians, strength beyond measure, speed that defied human perception, the ability to fly without mechanical assistance, vision that could pierce through solid matter or emit devastating heat. I spoke slowly, considering the implications. This being was nearly as powerful as a Primarch. Dahan agreed in his mechanical monotone, and he was lost, confused, and alone in a galaxy he was never meant to inhabit. Fishig spoke what we were all thinking. We should kill him now, before he becomes someone else's weapon. I considered this. It was the safe choice, the practical choice, but I have never been a man who takes the safe path when a better one presents itself. If we could guide him, show him the truth of this galaxy, he could be humanity's greatest weapon against the darkness. If we cannot, then we will do what must be done. But first, we find him. The hunt began immediately. Kal-El's trail was easy to follow once we knew what to look for. Handprints pressed into solid stone walls, each finger impression several inches deep. Tunnel supports bent and twisted where he had grabbed them for balance. Sections of wall melted by heat vision when he'd been startled by local wildlife. The poor creature had been testing his strength, trying to understand what he had become. We found the carcasses of several mining world predators, killed but not consumed clean breaks in their necks, as if someone had killed them efficiently, and then mourned the necessity. He was learning what he could do, and horrified by it. The trail led us to an abandoned Prometheum refinery overlooking the western wastes. The structure was old, dating back to the colony's founding, now left to rust and decay as newer facilities took over production. I approached alone, my hands visible and empty, activating my Vox amplifier. My voice echoed across the refinery as I introduced myself and explained that I knew what happened to his world. I knew why he was here. For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. He was exactly as Pontius had described. Tall, powerfully built, with features that were almost perfect in their symmetry. He wore the strange blue and red clothing, now torn and stained from his time in the wilderness. The S symbol on his chest seemed to catch the light of Ferrum VII's sun, but it was his eyes that captured my attention. Blue, impossibly blue, and filled with a depth of pain and confusion that I recognized. I'd seen it before, in the eyes of survivors pulled from demon worlds, in refugees who had lost everything. He spoke in careful formal Gothic. He had been listening to our people's Vox transmissions, learning the language. He spoke of an emperor and Xenos threats that he didn't understand. He asked where Earth was, where the planet his father sent him to might be. I gestured for him to sit, and to my surprise he did. We sat on old crates in that abandoned refinery, and I explained the truth as gently as I could. His journey was corrupted. The warp, the realm between stars, is a place of madness and chaos. His pod was pulled off course. This is not the universe he was meant for. He closed his eyes, and I saw the weight of that knowledge settle on him. Then he was truly alone, the last of his kind in a galaxy that was not his home. Perhaps, I said carefully, that is not the curse he believes it to be. He opened his eyes, looking at me with desperate hope, asking what I meant. I asked him to tell me what happened when he emerged from the pod. Tell me what he could do. And so he did. The words poured out of him, the confession of a man who desperately needed someone to understand. He described waking in the crater, confused and disoriented. His senses were overwhelming, capable of hearing heartbeats from miles away, seeing through solid matter, feeling the vibrations of every footstep on the planet's surface. When he tried to stand, he had accidentally leapt 100 meters into the air. When he tried to stop himself from falling, he discovered he could fly. When he was startled by the approaching guards, his eyes had unleashed heat that melted their weapons. On Krypton, he would have been ordinary. His father told him that in the pod's recordings. He said he would be a bridge between two peoples, human and Kryptonian. But here, he was something else. A monster with the power to destroy everything he touched. I told him firmly that he was not a monster. Perhaps something this galaxy desperately needs. I explained about the Imperium of Man, about how humanity is besieged on all sides by Xenos horrors that would see our species extinct. About the orcs, savage and brutal, who live only for war, about the Tyranids, a hunger from beyond the galaxy that consumes all life. About chaos, the corruption that turns men into monsters and drags entire worlds into the warp. Humanity stands at the brink of annihilation. We are surrounded by enemies, outnumbered, outgunned. We survive through will, through faith, and through the sacrifices of countless billions who stand against the darkness. Kal-El listened, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. I continued, describing the God-Emperor of mankind. 10,000 years ago, he united humanity and led us in a great crusade across the stars, but he was betrayed by his own sons, the Primarchs. Half of them turned to chaos and plunged the galaxy into civil war. The Emperor defeated them, but at a terrible cost. Now he sits upon the golden throne on Terra, his body broken, but his will eternal, protecting humanity from the horrors of the warp. Kal-El asked quietly if the Emperor sacrificed himself for all of us, I confirmed, so that humanity might endure. And now, countless trillions depend on warriors to hold the line against the darkness. His power could save worlds, could save billions of innocent lives. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between fear and duty, between self-preservation and the desire to protect others. He said softly that he was sent to be a protector. His father's last gift was to give him a chance at life, a chance to be something more. But he could hear the screams in this place. He could hear the suffering even now. He could hear people crying out across this world, across this system. How can one being make a difference against such darkness? Because one being often does, I replied. The Emperor himself proved that, and if he was even a fraction of what that pod's records suggest, he could be the miracle humanity needs. Before Kal-El could respond, Dahan's urgent voice crackled through my vox bead, Auspex sensors detecting massive atmospheric entry, multiple signals orc signatures, a full war fleet. I swore and activated my communicator, demanding to know how long until impact. 12 minutes, Dahan reported. They were heading directly for our position. Kal-El's head tilted as if listening to something far away. I asked if he could hear them. Ships, he said, his voice filled with wonder and horror, crude, loud, filled with voices shouting and laughing. They sound eager for violence. That's because they are, I said grimly, drawing my bolt pistol orcs live for war. They feel no fear, show no mercy, and they won't stop until everything in their path is dead or they are. Fishig came running across the refinery, Barbarossa's heavy footsteps clanging behind him. We needed to evacuate immediately. That was Warboss Grimscar's warband, hundreds of the green-skinned bastards. We didn't have time, I said, looking at the sky as the first ships began to appear, crude and brutal things that defied aerodynamics through sheer orcish will. We make our stand here. Kal-El stood, his cape catching the wind, asking how many. Too many, Fishig said flatly. We were going to die here. The first orc transport slammed into the ground a quarter-mile away with enough force to shake the earth, then another, and another. Within minutes, dozens of transports had disgorged their cargo of greenskins, and the air filled with their savage war cries. Wah! 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 They came like a green tide, hundreds of brutal warriors wielding crude choppers and sluggers. Massive knobs led the charge, their armour cobbled together from scrap metal, and the bones of their enemies' battle-worn battle wagons roared across the landscape, their engines belching black smoke. Fishig opened fire with his bolt pistol, each shot a prayer to the Emperor Barbarossa's heavy bolter roared, cutting down orcs with disciplined bursts. But for every greenskin that fell, 2 more took its place. An orc knob, easily 8 feet tall and twice as wide, charged toward Fishig with a massive power claw raised high. My interrogator tried to dodge, but the creature was faster than it looked. The claw descended toward Fishig's head. Then Kal-El moved. One moment he was beside me, the next he was between Fishig and the knob. Moving so fast, he seemed to teleport. His hand caught the power claw mid-swing, stopping it completely. The knob stared in confusion for a heartbeat, before Kal-El's other hand struck its chest. The orc exploded backward, its armor crumpling like parchment, its body ragdolling through 3 of its fellows. The battlefield went silent for a single, frozen moment. Orcs and humans alike stared at this stranger in blue and red, who had just killed a knob with a single blow. Then the orcs roared with delight. "Big one! Proper fight! Wah!" They charged with renewed enthusiasm, and Kal-El's eyes began to glow. He told me to get to safety. He would handle this. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day, not because it was terrible, but because it was beautiful. Kal-El unleashed his full power for the first time. His heat vision lanced out, twin beams of crimson energy that cut through orc battle wagons like a blade through flesh. Metal melted, engines exploded, and greenskins were vaporized where the beams touched them. He moved through the battlefield like an avenging angel, his speed making him appear in multiple places at once. An orc deaf dread, a massive walking tank of armor and guns, turned its weapons toward us. Kal-El flew straight at it, his fists extended. The impact when he hit the machine was like an artillery strike. The deaf dread came apart, its pieces scattering across the battlefield. The orcs loved it. They swarmed toward him with savage glee, seeing him as the ultimate challenge. Hundreds of greenskins converged on the flying figure, firing wildly, chopping at empty air, dying by the dozens. I watched as Kal-El caught a rocket mid-flight and threw it back at the orc who had fired it. I saw him lift an entire battle wagon over his head and hurl it into a charging mob. I witnessed him move so fast that he created shockwaves, sending orcs tumbling like leaves in a storm. But what struck me most was his face. He wasn't enjoying this. Every kill brought a flash of pain across his features. He was a being of immense power, forced to use that power to end lives, and it was tearing him apart inside. Dahan observed through his augmetic sensors that Kal-El was holding back. Even now, he could kill them all instantly. But he was trying to minimize the violence in this galaxy, I said quietly. That kind of mercy will destroy him. The tide of battle shifted when Kal-El looked up at the sky. I followed his gaze and saw the massive orc rock still in orbit, disgorging more transports. He said simply, "No more." Then he flew. He shot into the sky like a crimson comet, accelerating so fast he created a sonic boom that shattered windows in the abandoned refinery. We watched on our Auspex scanners as he reached the rock, a ship the size of a small moon, cobbled together from asteroids and scrap metal, and then, impossibly, the rock began to break apart. Kal-El tore through it like parchment, his heat vision cutting through bulkheads, his fists punching through armor that could withstand orbital bombardment. The massive ship shuddered, listed, and then exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the sky. On the ground, the remaining orcs saw their ship destroyed and their war boss killed. Without leadership, without the promise of a good fight, they fled to their transports and retreated into the void. Kal-El descended slowly, his cape billowing around him, his eyes no longer glowing. He landed before us, and I saw his hands were shaking. He said in a hollow voice that he killed them. Hundreds of them. He could hear their thoughts stop, one by one. Fishig said firmly that he saved us. He saved this entire colony. Kal-El looked at the battlefield, at the bodies and wreckage, asking if he did. Or did he just prove that he was what he feared? A weapon. A destroyer. I stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. He was what he chose to be today. He chose to protect the innocent. That made him a hero. He asked softly if there were heroes in my galaxy. I thought about that question as we walked back to the Ascene. I thought about the Space Marines who gave their lives defending worlds they would never see again, about the Imperial Guard who stood against horrors that would break lesser men, about the countless billions who simply endured day after day in a galaxy that offered nothing but suffering. Yes, I said finally, there are heroes. They just look different than what you might expect. The response from Inquisitorial Command came faster than I anticipated. I had sent an encrypted astropathic message to Lord Inquisitor Torquemada Cateas, one of the most powerful men in the Ordo Xenos, detailing what we had discovered on Ferrum 7. His reply was brief and absolute. Bring Kal-El to Terra for examination by the Emperor's custodians, or terminate him immediately. I stood in my quarters aboard the Essene, reading the message again, feeling the weight of the decision before me. In the adjacent chamber, Kal-El was learning about the Imperium from Fischig, his questions endless, his horror at what he learned growing with each answer. A voice said from the shadows that I wasn't going to kill him. I turned to see the shimmering psychic projection of Gideon Ravener, my former pupil, now a powerful Inquisitor in his own right. His consciousness reached across the stars through the warp, manifesting as a ghostly presence in my ship. No, I agreed. I wasn't going to kill him. Ravener warned that Cateas would demand it. A being of such power outside Imperial control was too dangerous to allow, which was why I was proposing a third option. Field deployment. Supervised missions under Inquisitorial authority. Let him prove his loyalty through action. Ravener observed that it was risky. If he turned against us, thousands could die. If we killed him, I countered, we lose the greatest weapon humanity has gained in 10,000 years. Sometimes, old friend, the greatest risk is in playing it safe. Ravener's projection smiled, a ghostly expression of approval. Then he would support my petition to the Conclave. But he warned me to be careful. Power like that changes people. Make sure it doesn't change him into something worse than what we fight against. The projection faded, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I found Kal-El on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. He looked lost, a stranger in a strange land, searching for something he would never find. He said without turning that his father told him stories. In the recordings he left in the pod, he told him about Krypton, about their people's achievements. They had eliminated war, poverty, disease. They had become something greater than their base instincts. And then their son betrayed them, and it all meant nothing. His father saved him, I said, joining him at the viewport. That meant something. He continued, saying his father sent him to be a bridge, to bring the best of Krypton to Earth to help them become something better. But this wasn't Earth, and he couldn't be what his father intended. So what was he supposed to be here? I showed him the message from Cateas. Let him read the ultimatum. He said flatly that they wanted him to serve or die. The Imperium doesn't know how to handle what it cannot control, I explained. He represented something unique, something powerful, and therefore something dangerous. They needed assurance that he wouldn't be turned against humanity. Kal-El was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me with those impossibly blue eyes and told me honestly that he was afraid. I asked of becoming what this place wanted him to be. A weapon, a destroyer, of losing the man his father hoped he would become. I considered my next words carefully. They would shape everything that followed. On Krypton, perhaps his father's vision could have come true. Perhaps he would have been a bridge, a teacher, a guide to something better. But this was not Krypton, and this galaxy was not kind to idealists. Here, he had a choice. He could reject this reality, refuse to participate in its violence, and he would be destroyed. Not because he was evil, but because he represented too great a threat. I paused, letting that sink in. Or he could accept this galaxy for what it was, acknowledge the darkness, and choose to be a light within it. Not by changing who he was, but by holding on to his ideals even when everything around him demanded he surrender them. The Imperium needed warriors, yes, but it also needed people who remembered why we fight in the first place. Kal-El turned back to the viewport, watching the stars streak past as we travelled through the void. He asked slowly if he agreed. If he chose to serve, would he be allowed to save people? Not just fight the Imperium's enemies, but actually protect the innocent? When possible, I said honestly, but he needed to understand that in this galaxy we often face impossible choices. Sometimes we must sacrifice the few to save the many. Sometimes entire worlds must die so that the corruption doesn't spread. The calculus was brutal, but it was necessary. Then he would try, he said finally. He would serve the Emperor and protect humanity as best he could. But he wouldn't lose himself. He wouldn't become just another weapon in an endless war. "Then we had an accord," I said, offering my hand. He shook it, his grip careful, always aware of his strength. "One more thing," I added. "If he was going to operate in the Imperium, he would need a name that people could understand. Something that reflected what he represented." Kal-El looked down at his red cape, stained now with the dust of Ferrum 7 and the blood of orcs. "The Crimson Angel," he said. "If he was to be a symbol, let it be one of protection, of hope, even in darkness." And so began the education of Kal-El, last son of Krypton, in the brutal realities of the 41st millennium. Fishig became his primary instructor in Imperial history. My old friend had fought in more wars than I could count, seen more horrors than any man should endure, and yet retained a core of decency that made him perfect for the task. In the ship's library, surrounded by ancient texts and hololithic displays, Fishig told Kal-El the story of humanity's rise and fall and struggle for survival. He spoke of the dark age of technology, when humanity had reached heights of achievement that made Krypton's civilization seem primitive, of colony ships that crossed the galaxy, of thinking machines that served mankind's every need, of a golden age of prosperity and peace. Then it all came crashing down. The machines turned against us. Warp storms isolated every human world. Aliens descended on our scattered colonies like predators on wounded prey. Humanity nearly went extinct. Kal-El listened with growing horror as Fishig described the age of strife, 10,000 years of darkness where human civilization collapsed, and billions died in suffering and chaos. Then he came. The Emperor, a being of such power and vision that he united all of terror, then launched the Great Crusade to reclaim the galaxy for mankind. He created the Primarchs, 20 genetically perfect sons who would be his generals. He built the Space Marines, superhuman warriors who knew no fear. For 2 centuries, the Imperium expanded, bringing lost human worlds back into the fold. It sounded like a new golden age, Kal-El observed. "It should have been," Fishig said bitterly. But then came the Horus heresy. The hololithic display shifted, showing the face of Horus Lupercal, most favoured of the Primarchs before his fall. Half the Primarchs turned to chaos. They led their legions in rebellion against the Emperor. Brother fought brother. Sons killed fathers. The galaxy burned in civil war. And when Horus finally confronted the Emperor on Terra itself, in the throne room of the Imperial Palace, they fought a battle that shook reality itself. Kal-El asked what happened, though I suspect he already knew the answer wouldn't be happy. "The Emperor won," Fishig said quietly, "but at a terrible cost. Horus's betrayal wounded him beyond any mortal healing. Now he sat upon the golden throne, kept alive by ancient technology and the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers each day his body was broken, but his will endured. He watched over humanity from terror, his psychic might holding back the demons of the warp, guiding our ships through the immaterium, protecting us even in his eternal suffering." I watched Kal-El process this information. His expression shifted through horror, disbelief, and finally a kind of understanding. He said softly that the Emperor sacrificed everything just as his father did, gave up his own existence so that others might live. "Yes," Fishig confirmed. "And now, 10,000 years later, we fight to honour that sacrifice every day. Humanity stands at the brink of annihilation. Every day we choose to endure." But history lessons were not enough. Kal-El needed to see the truth of this galaxy with his own eyes. I arranged for him to view recorded pict captures from various inquisitorial investigations. Dahan set up the hololithic display in the main briefing room, and I sat beside Kal-El as we watched the horrors unfold. The first recording showed a world called Typhon Primaris, consumed by chaos corruption. The population had turned to worship of the dark gods, their bodies twisted into nightmarish forms. We watched as Chaos Space Marines of the Black Legion descended on the last loyal defenders, slaughtering them with cruel efficiency. Kal-El's hands clenched as he watched civilians, people who looked just like any human in the Imperium, transformed into gibbering monsters. He saw children with too many eyes, men and women fused together into writhing flesh piles, entire cities transformed into living temples of suffering. This is what chaos does, I explained quietly. It corrupts, perverts, destroys everything good about humanity and turns it into a mockery. And the worst part? Many of them welcomed it. They made the choice to turn away from the Emperor, believing the promises of the dark gods would bring them power or pleasure or enlightenment. He asked how we stop it. I showed him the next recording, the same world seen from orbit as the inquisitorial fleet unleashed Exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes rained down, cracking the planet's crust, igniting its atmosphere. Within hours, Typhon Primaris was a lifeless ball of molten rock. This is how, I said, 13 billion souls destroyed to prevent the corruption from spreading. Kal-El stood abruptly, turning away from the display. There must be another way, some way to save them, to cure the corruption. There isn't, I said firmly. Once chaos takes root in a soul, it cannot be undone. The demon becomes part of them, and they part of the demon. Mercy, in this case, would doom entire systems. This was the price of survival. This was what we did to protect those who remain pure. The next recording showed a Tyranid invasion. Kal-El watched in silence as the Hive fleet descended on the agri-world of Graven's Harvest. The Tyranids came in waves of living nightmares, hormagaunts that moved like a chittering tide, carnifexes that shrugged off Lascanon fire, hive tyrants that coordinated the swarm with cold intelligence. But worse than the creatures themselves was watching what happened to the human population. The Tyranids didn't just kill them, they consumed them. We watched as civilians were dragged into digestion pools, their bodies broken down into genetic material to fuel the Hive fleet's endless hunger. They don't hate us, I explained as Kal-El watched with horrified fascination. They don't even recognize us as sentient beings. To the Tyranids, humanity was simply biomass to be harvested food for a hunger that spans galaxies. And they were coming from beyond our galaxy, an endless swarm that would not stop until every living thing had been consumed. He asked how many worlds they had taken. Hundreds, I said, and that was just the leading edge of their invasion. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guides our ships, had detected larger Hive fleets in the void beyond. If they all reached Imperial space, nothing would survive. The final recording was perhaps the most horrifying because it was the most human a Dark Eldar raid on the shrine world of St. Markovia. Kal-El watched as the Xenos raiders emerged from their webway portals, moving with supernatural grace and cruelty. They didn't kill the humans quickly. The Dark Eldar prolonged every death, savoured every scream, tortured every captive with artistic precision. Men, women, children, all were dragged through the webway portals into Comera, the Dark City, where they would spend the rest of their lives in agony. Why? Kal-El demanded. What purpose did such cruelty serve? They feed on it, I explained. The Dark Eldar were a dying race. Their souls were being consumed by Slanesh, the chaos god they accidentally created through their own depravity. The only way they could sustain themselves was by feeding on the suffering of others. Pain, terror, anguish. These emotions literally kept them alive. So they raided, they captured, they tortured, because the alternative was their own damnation. Kal-El stood in the darkened briefing room, surrounded by the echoes of atrocities, and I saw the weight of this new reality crushing down on him. This was what he was sent to protect people from. This was the darkness his father hoped he could stand against. Yes, I said simply, this and worse. There were horrors in this galaxy that we hadn't even shown him. Necrons waking from their tomb worlds, ancient machines of death orc-wars that swept across entire sectors, genstealer cults that corrupted worlds from within, and always the ever-present threat of chaos waiting to corrupt anyone who showed even a moment of weakness. I stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. He asked me once if there were heroes in this galaxy. The answer was yes, but they weren't the kind his father might have imagined. They were people who saw this darkness and chose to fight anyway, who sacrificed everything, knowing they would never be thanked, never be remembered, never see the victory they were fighting for. They endured because the alternative was extinction. Kal-El looked at me, and I saw something change in his eyes. Not a loss of innocence, but a hardening of resolve. "Then teach me," he said. "Teach me how to fight in this galaxy. Teach me how to save who I can." "That," I replied, "was exactly what I intended to do." Over the following weeks, as we travelled toward our next assignment, I trained Kal-El in the art of making impossible choices. I would present him with scenarios, tactical problems that had no good solutions, and watch as he struggled to find the least terrible option, a hive city of 10 million under attack by a Genestealer cult. He could save the upper hive, 3 million wealthy citizens, or try to evacuate the underhive, 7 million poor workers. But if he chose the underhive, the cult would escape and infect other worlds. What would he do? Kal-El would agonize over the decision, trying to find a way to save everyone, before finally accepting that sometimes there was no perfect answer. He would say, each word costing him something, that he would save the upper hive, and he would make sure the cult didn't spread. 7 million die now, or billions die later. Correct, I would confirm. Welcome to the Imperium. But it wasn't just tactical training. I also taught him about faith, about why humanity worships the Emperor despite his silence, despite his absence from daily affairs. Faith was what sustained us, I explained one evening as we shared Amasek in my quarters. Not because we believed the Emperor would personally save us, but because we believed his sacrifice meant something, that our suffering had purpose, that enduring was itself an act of defiance against the darkness. Even when that faith was used to justify atrocities, Kal-El challenged. He had read about the ecclesiarchy's purges, the billions killed for heresy, the worlds burned for daring to question imperial doctrine. Yes, I admitted, even then. Because without that faith, without that unity, humanity would fracture into a million feuding factions and be swept away by our enemies. The Imperium was not kind, it was not just, but it was necessary. It was the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. And what about me? He asked. Did I have faith? I thought about that question, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. I had faith in humanity, I said finally. Not in the Imperium as an institution, not in the ecclesiarchy's dogma, but in the people themselves, the soldiers who fight knowing they would probably die, the workers who toiled in horrible conditions to keep the Imperium functioning, the mothers who raised children in a galaxy that offered them nothing but suffering. Those people were worth fighting for. They were why I did what I did. He nodded slowly, understanding. Then they were why he would fight too. The Vox panel chimed. Dahan's mechanical voice reported that we had received new orders from Inquisitorial Command. Our first mission together was about to begin. The Forge world of Meridian Prime had fallen under attack. A chaos cult of Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, had infiltrated the Mechanicus priesthood. They had summoned Makar the Reborn, a demon prince of terrible power who had plagued the Imperium for 10,000 years. Lord General Stern's Imperial Guard regiments were being slaughtered. The Forge world's Skitarii legions had been corrupted or destroyed. Without intervention, Meridian Prime would fall, and its strategic manufactorums would be turned to producing weapons for the forces of chaos. This was his trial, I told Kal-El as we prepared for deployment. This was where he proved whether he could be trusted with the power he wielded. He looked at me with those blue eyes, now filled with grim determination. He wouldn't let me down. Don't worry about me, I replied. Worry about the millions of souls on that world who were depending on him. We deployed via Thunderhawk gunship, descending through a sky filled with demon craft and corrupted servitors. The Forge world burned below us, its once pristine manufactorums now twisted into nightmarish parodies by the touch of Chaos Kal. El stood at the gunship's open ramp, his red cape billowing in the wind, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like what he was meant to be. Not a weapon, not a destroyer. An angel, wreathed in crimson, descending to bring judgment. I ordered the pilot to take us in low. drop us in the central manufacturing district. That was where Makar was conducting his ritual. As we descended, I activated the Vox channel to Lord General Stern's command post, informing him that reinforcements were arriving. His voice was thick with desperation. Whatever I was bringing, he hoped it was enough. They had lost 3 regiments already. That demon was unstoppable. "Trust me, General," I replied. What I was bringing was more than enough. We jumped from the gunship. While it was still 50 feet in the air, I activated my Rosarius force field, landing hard but unharmed. Fishig and Barbara Sater landed beside me, weapons ready, and Kal-El simply floated down, capes spreading behind him like wings, touching down without a sound. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Imperial Guardsmen fired laser guns at shambling cultists and screeching demons. Armoured chimeras burned, their crews stumbling from the wreckage, only to be torn apart by warp spawn. And in the centre of it all, towering over the carnage, stood Makar the Reborn. The Demon Prince was a nightmare made manifest. Easily 30 feet tall, its form constantly shifting between states of matter and energy, wings of purple flame spread from its back. Eyes covered every inch of its body, each one staring in different directions, seeing past, present, and possible futures simultaneously. Makar laughed when it saw us, a sound that made reality itself shudder. "More mortals come to feed my ascension. The architect of fate smiles upon me this day." I said calmly that the Daemon was his. Kal-El looked at me, uncertainty flickering across his face, asking how he fought something like that. "The same way he fought anything," I replied, "with everything he had." And then Kal-El launched himself forward. He moved so fast that he created a sonic boom, crossing the kilometre between us and Makar in less than a second, his fist connected with the Demon Prince's chest with the force of an artillery strike. Makar staggered backward, genuine surprise crossing its ever-shifting features. What was he? Kal-El's voice carried across the battlefield as he said he was someone who was going to stop it. The Demon Prince roared and attacked bolts of warp fire erupted from its hands, reality-bending flames that could consume souls. Kal-El dodged, his speed allowing him to avoid the attacks that would have killed a space marine instantly. He retaliated with heat vision, twin beams of concentrated energy that seared Makar's demonic flesh. The Demon Prince shrieked, not in pain but in outrage. He dared. He who reeked of hope and purity, he dared strike at a Prince of Tzeentch. "I dare," Kal-El replied, and flew at the demon again. What followed was a battle that would be recorded in Imperial histories for centuries to come. Kal-El and Makar fought across the manufacturing district, their clash destroying buildings and shaking the very foundations of the Forge world. Makar wielded the powers of chaos itself, hurling bolts of change fire that could transform matter into madness. It summoned lesser demons to swarm Kal-El, pink horrors that cackled and split into blue horrors when destroyed. But Kal-El's purity acted as a shield against the corruption. Where Makar's warp fire touched him, it simply dissipated, unable to corrupt or transform a soul that remained untainted. His heat vision burned through demons and demon prince alike, his super strength allowing him to rip through warp-spawned flesh. I watched from the ground as they fought, and I realized something profound. Kal-El wasn't just physically powerful. His very nature, his hope and determination and refusal to surrender to darkness was anathema to chaos. He was doing what no ordinary human could do, facing a demon prince in single combat and winning. "This is impossible," Makar shrieked, one of its wings torn away by Kal-El's strength. He was mortal. He could not stand against the powers of the warp. He could, Kal-El said, grabbing the demon prince by its throat, because he had seen what they did, what they had done to this world, to these people, and he wasn't going to let them hurt anyone else. His eyes glowed crimson, and heat vision poured forth at point-blank range. Makar's scream echoed across the warp itself as its physical form began to burn away. The demon howled that it was eternal. It would return. The changer of ways would bring it back. "Then I'll be waiting," Kal-El replied, and his heat vision intensified, Makar the Reborn exploded in a burst of purple flame and screaming faces, its demonic essence banished back to the warp. The lesser demons shrieked and vanished, their anchor to reality severed. The cultists, seeing their master destroyed, either fled or fell to their knees in despair. Kal-El descended slowly to where the demon prince had stood. His cape was torn, his strange blue and red uniform scorched, but he was unharmed. He stood there, breathing heavily, looking at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Around him, Imperial Guardsmen emerged from cover. Staring at this figure who had just saved them all one by one, they fell to their knees, not in worship, but in respect and awe. Lord General Stern approached, his uniform stained with blood and ash. He didn't know who Kal-El was, but he had just saved 2 million souls. The Emperor must have sent him. The Inquisitor sent me, Kal-El replied, looking at me. I walked forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. He did well. He saved these people. Did he? He asked quietly. So only I could hear. Or did he just delay their suffering? Before I could answer, Dahan's urgent voice came through my vox bead. He was detecting massive chaos corruption in the eastern capital hive. The cult's influence was too widespread. The city could not be saved. I felt my heart sink. I knew what had to be done. I told Kal-El we needed to talk. I led him away from the celebrating guardsmen to a quiet corner of the manufactorum where we could speak privately. Fishig joined us, his expression grim. The eastern capital, I said without preamble. 3 billion souls. The chaos corruption was too deep. If we didn't act, it would spread across the entire Forge world. Kal-El looked at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. No, we just saved these people. We could save them too. We couldn't, I said firmly. Dahan's readings were clear. The cult had been operating there for months. The population was compromised. If we tried to purge the cult by ground assault, the fighting would last months, and the corruption would spread through contact. There was only one solution. Exterminatus, Fishig said quietly. No, Kal-El said again, his voice rising. He wouldn't allow it. There had to be another way. Let him fly there. Let him find the cult leaders. He could root them out before they spread further. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at me. And how many would die in the fighting? How many innocents would be caught in the crossfire? How many would be corrupted while he searched? This was the choice. 3 billion die now, quickly and cleanly, or 10 billion die slowly as the corruption spreads. This was the calculus of survival. It was murder, he said, pulling away from me. It was war, I countered. This was what I tried to teach him. In his home, perhaps he could have saved everyone. Here, we saved who we could. Those 3 billion were already lost. But the rest of Meridian Prime, the rest of the sector, they could be saved if we acted now. Kal-El looked up at the sky and I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Everything his father had taught him, everything he had hoped to be, warred against the brutal reality of the 41st millennium. He said quietly that he saved them from the demon, only to watch them die anyway. He saved these people. I gestured to the guardsmen around us. He saved this Forge world's manufactorums, which would produce weapons and armor that would save millions more. He did his duty. Now I must do mine. I activated my Vox link to the fleet in orbit. This was Inquisitor Eisenhorn. Authorization code Sigma-77. Target the eastern capital hive of Meridian Prime. Commence Exterminatus protocol. The reply confirmed. Cyclonic torpedoes armed and ready. Kal-El watched the sky as the torpedoes descended. Great burning streaks of light that struck the distant hive city with the wrath of an angry god. The explosions were visible even from our position. Hundreds of kilometers away, great mushroom clouds of fire and ash that rose into the atmosphere. 3 billion souls, gone in an instant. This was the Imperium he was asking him to serve, Kal-El said, his voice hollow. Yes, I replied. This was the Imperium. Brutal, necessary, and all that stood between humanity and extinction. I wouldn't lie to him and say it was right. I wouldn't tell him that those 3 billion deserved to die. But I would tell him that their deaths saved 10 billion others. That was the only morality this galaxy allowed. Kal-El was silent for a long time. Then he looked at me with eyes that had lost something indefinable. Then he would serve, because someone had to, because if people like me were making these choices alone, someone should be there to remind me what I was fighting for. And what was that? I asked Hope. He replied simply, that someday this wouldn't be necessary, that humanity would find a way to be better. I smiled sadly. Hold on to that hope, Kal-El. This galaxy needed it, and so began the career of the Crimson Angel, protector of the Imperium, bearer of impossible hope in a hopeless galaxy. 8 months. 8 months of deployment across the Segmentum Obscurus, and each mission took something from Kal-El that he would never get back. We fought alongside space wolves on their ice world of Fenris, when a chaos warband of the Thousand Suns attempted to breach the Fang itself. I watched Kal-El stand shoulder to shoulder with Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane, 2 warriors of immense power defending civilians as they evacuated through underground tunnels. Ragnar's great company fought like the legends they were, but even space marines fall. I stood beside Kal-El as we watched 50 of the Emperor's finest warriors give their lives in a rearguard action, buying time for 10,000 civilians to escape. They knew they were going to die, Kal-El said afterward, staring at the bodies of the fallen space wolves. They charged anyway. That was what it meant to be a space marine, Ragnar replied, his armor dented and scorched, but his spirit unbroken. They were the Emperor's angels of death, and death held no fear for them. But Kal-El, the Crimson Angel, fought like he was afraid of what he might become. Because I am, Kal-El admitted. Ragnar laughed, a booming sound that echoed across the frozen battlefield. Good. The day a warrior stopped fearing what he might become was the day he fell to chaos. Hold on to that fear, use it, but don't let it stop him from doing what must be done. We fought beside the Blood Angels, defending their homeworld of Baal from a Tyranid splinter fleet. Kal-El flew through swarms of gargoyles, his heat vision cutting through the living tide, trying desperately to reach civilian evacuation points before the Tyranids consumed them. But the hive mind was patient and cruel. For every 100 creatures Kal-El destroyed, 1,000 more emerged from the bioships in orbit. We managed to evacuate 3 of the 5 major cities. The other 2 fell before we could reach them. I found Kal-El afterward, standing on a cliff overlooking one of the consumed cities. All that remained was a field of purple-grey biomass, the digestion pools where millions of people had been broken down into genetic slurry to fuel the hive fleet. He wasn't fast enough, he said. If he had been faster, if he had prioritized differently, then other cities would have fallen instead, I interrupted. He saved 3 million souls. In this galaxy, that counted as a miracle. 3 million saved, 2 million lost, he said bitterly. How did I live with that? How did I keep fighting when I knew I couldn't save everyone? Because saving everyone was impossible, I replied. But saving someone was always possible. Those 3 million people, they would have children. Those children would have children. His actions today would echo through generations. That had to be enough. We stood at the Cadian Gate before its fall, the last days of that legendary fortress world Kal-El fought, beside Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed's forces as the 13th Black Crusade descended upon them. I watched as he carried wounded guardsmen from the front lines, moving faster than the enemy could track, becoming a crimson blur that meant salvation to those who saw him. But even his speed wasn't enough to stop what was coming. When Abaddon's forces cracked the planet and the warp storms swallowed Cardia, Kal-El evacuated as many as he could carry, making trip after trip through the chaos until I had to physically order him to stop. The planet was gone, I shouted over the roar of reality tearing apart. There was no one left to save. There was always someone left to save, he shouted back. Preparing to fly back into the madness, Fishik grabbed his arm. And if he died there, how many wouldn't be saved in the future? He had to choose. Die a hero today, or live to save others tomorrow. Kal-El looked back at the dying world, at the warp storms consuming everything, and I saw something break in him. He came with us to the evacuation ships, but he never stopped looking back. But perhaps the hardest mission was the most routine. A penal legion deployment on the mining world of Kursk 7. The prisoners, men and women guilty of crimes ranging from theft to murder, were sent to clear out an orc infestation in the deep mines. They went in with laser guns and flak armor. They died by the hundreds, buying time with their blood for the real soldiers to move into position. Kal-El watched the Vox screens as the penal legion was systematically slaughtered, used as bait to draw out the orc positions. When the last prisoner died, the Imperial Guard moved in and eliminated the weakened orcs with minimal casualties. They were people, Kal-El said to me afterward. Criminals, yes, but people. And we sent them to die just to make the real battle easier. Yes, I said simply. That was murder. That was the Imperium, I replied. Those prisoners owed a debt to society. They paid that debt with their lives, and in doing so, they saved the lives of trained soldiers who could continue fighting. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was necessary. It was wrong, Kal-El insisted. Perhaps, I agreed, but what would he have me do? Refuse the Imperial command structure? Rebel against the system? That path led to chaos and civil war. More would die, so we worked within the system, we saved who we could, and we accepted that perfection was impossible. I saw Fischig watching Kal-El carefully, saw the concern in my old friend's eyes. Later, in private, he voiced what we were both thinking. He was changing, becoming colder, harder. Each mission took something from him. I knew, I replied. But what choice did we have? If we stopped using him, the Inquisition would demand answers. If we released him, he would be hunted. The only path forward was through. And if he broke? Fischig asked quietly. I didn't have an answer for that. One evening, as we travelled through the warp toward our next assignment, I found Kal-El in the ship's small chapel. He wasn't praying, just sitting in the pews, staring at the golden aquila on the altar. He said without turning that he came here believing in heroes. His father's recordings told him about heroes, about people who did the right thing because it was right, not because it was efficient or necessary. Heroes who saved everyone because everyone deserved to be saved. That was a beautiful ideal, I said, sitting beside him. It was a lie, he replied flatly. There were no heroes in this galaxy. There were only survivors, doing whatever they must to endure one more day. Was that what he had become? I asked. A survivor? He looked at me, and I saw the toll these 8 months had taken. The light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something harder, more pragmatic. He didn't know what he had become, he admitted, but he knew he wasn't the man his father hoped he would be. He had killed thousands. He had watched billions die. He had made choices that would have horrified the person he was when he emerged from that pod. And the worst part was that he was starting to understand why those choices were necessary. That was called wisdom, I said gently. Painful, terrible wisdom. It felt like losing, he said quietly. Perhaps it was, I replied, but it was also the only way to keep fighting. If he held on to his innocence, his idealism, unchanged by the reality around him, he would be crushed by it. What he was doing, the change he was going through, it was adaptation. It was survival. He didn't want to survive, Kal-El said. He wanted to make a difference. Then, keep fighting, I urged. Keep holding on to that hope even when it seemed pointless. Because the moment he gave up hope entirely, he became what we fought against. He became just another weapon in an endless war. He was silent for a long time. Then he stood, straightening his torn cape, and looked at me with renewed determination. One more mission, he said. Give him one mission where he could truly save people, where the choice wasn't who dies but who lives. He needed to remember why he was doing this. All right, I agreed. The next mission, we would focus on evacuation and protection. No killing unless absolutely necessary. We saved people, as many as we could. He smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the person he used to be. Thank you, Inquisitor. The Vox panel chimed. Dahan's mechanical voice announced we had received new orders. The shrine world of Blessed Catherine was under attack by the Dark Eldar. The Cabal of the Poison Tongue, led by the cruel Archon Vresk, was conducting a slave raid. Thousands of Imperial citizens were being dragged through webway portals into Comora. This was it, I told Kal-El, his mission. Save as many as he could. We deployed immediately, descending upon Blessed Catherine like the Emperor's wrath. The shrine world was beautiful, covered in vast cathedrals and monuments to the saints, but beauty meant nothing to the Dark Eldar. They moved through the cities like shadows, their Kabbalite warriors and witches slaughtering anyone who resisted, capturing anyone who surrendered. Kal-El launched himself into the battle with renewed purpose. He wasn't trying to kill the Dark Eldar, though he would if necessary. He was focused entirely on protecting the civilians I watched, as he created a shield of his own body, standing before a cathedral as Dark Eldar splinter rifles fired at him. The poison-coated projectiles bounced off harmlessly, and he used his heat vision to disable the raiders' vehicles without killing the occupants. He flew from district to district, his speed allowing him to be everywhere at once. He caught falling civilians when buildings collapsed. He carried wounded to safety. He stood between the slavers and their prey, an immovable crimson wall. But Vresk was cunning. The Archon had not become one of the most feared raiders in Comora. Through frontal assault, he set a trap. As Kal-El defended the northern districts, Vresk's forces attacked the southern cathedral complex. By the time Kal-El realized the deception, thousands of citizens had already been dragged through the webway portals. I heard him shout over the Vox. Not again! I watched from my position as Kal-El flew at superhuman speed toward the southern districts, but he was too late. The Dark Eldar had already begun their retreat, hauling their captives through portals that flickered with eldritch energy. Kal-El arrived just as the largest portal began to close. Through it, he could see the nightmare cityscape of Comora, could hear the screams of the captured as they were dragged into the Dark City's torment pits. I shouted through the Vox that it was a trap. Vresk was trying to lure him in, but he wasn't listening. I saw him hovering before the portal, saw the conflict on his face as he made his decision. This was what I wanted, I heard him say, though I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or to himself. A mission where he could save people, where the choice was simple. Come back, I ordered. We had saved thousands. Don't throw that away for... And he interrupted. For what? For efficiency? For the greater good? He had been listening to that logic for 8 months. He had watched worlds burn because it was necessary. He had seen billions sacrificed because the calculus demanded it. But he could still hear them screaming in there. He could save them. He would be lost forever. Fishig's voice joined mine on the Vox. The webway was a maze. He would never find his way out. Please. Think about all the good he could still do. He was thinking about it, he replied. His father sent him to be a light in the darkness. I said that myself, remember? That he should hold on to hope, that this galaxy needed it. Well, what darker place existed than Comora? What greater act of hope than standing against despair in its own home? I realized what he was about to do. As his Inquisitor, I ordered him to stand down, return to the ship immediately. He looked back at me, and across the distance I could see him smile. It was sad, but genuine, the smile of a man who had finally found his purpose. He was sorry, but he couldn't follow that order. I taught him to make impossible choices. This was his, and then he flew into the portal. I ran toward it, but Fishig grabbed my arm, shouting that it was closing. The portal collapsed in a burst of dark light, severing Comora's connection to Blessed Catherine. The Dark Eldar who remained, cut off from their escape route, were quickly eliminated by the arriving Space Marine reinforcements from the Order of Our Martyred Lady, but Kal-El was gone. I stood there in the ruins of the cathedral complex, staring at the space where the portal had been, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. He made his choice, Fishig said quietly. I couldn't have stopped him. I created him, I replied. I turned him into what he became. I took a being of hope and idealism, and I showed him the darkness until he couldn't see the light anymore. And then I gave him one chance to be a hero, and he took it even though it cost him everything. He was always going to make this choice, Fischig insisted. From the moment we found him in that crater, this was where he was heading. I didn't create him, I just guided him. To his death, I said bitterly. To his purpose, Fischig corrected. He said it himself. A light in the darkness. Maybe that was what he was always meant to be. The encrypted astropathic message to Lord Inquisitor Cotes was the hardest report I ever had to write. I sat in my quarters aboard the Asina, staring at the blank data slate, trying to find the words to explain what had happened. How do you tell the Inquisition that you lost a weapon of nearly Primarch-level power? How do you explain that you let him fly into the Dark City on a rescue mission that had no chance of success? In the end, I told the truth. Case File 4077 Sigma. Final report. Subject Kal-El, designation Crimson Angel, has been lost in pursuit of Dark Eldar raiders into the Webway Portal network, last confirmed location, Commorragh. Over 8 months of deployment, the subject proved invaluable in combat operations against Chaos, Orcs and Tyranid forces. His abilities exceeded initial projections. He was capable of destroying demon princes in single combat, could carry wounded from battlefields at supersonic speeds, and demonstrated tactical intelligence that rivaled trained space marines. However, the subject never fully adapted to Imperial doctrine. He retained an idealistic worldview that made him unsuitable for long-term operations requiring difficult decisions. On the shrine world of Blessed Catherine, when faced with the choice between tactical victory and rescuing captured civilians, he chose the latter despite direct orders to withdraw. I took full responsibility for this outcome. I believed I could train him, mould him into a proper Imperial asset. I was wrong. His nature, while admirable, was incompatible with the realities of our mission recommendation. Classify all records of subject Kal-El under inquisitorial seal. The existence of such a powerful being outside Imperial control could inspire dangerous hopes among the civilian population. Let him become a legend, but not a truth. Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn, Ordo Xenos. I encrypted the message and sent it through the astropathic choir. Then I sat in the darkness of my quarters, a glass of Amasec in hand, and allowed myself a moment of grief. He was better than us, I said to the empty room. Better than this galaxy deserved. The response from Cotes came swiftly. All records of Kal-El were to be classified and sealed. No public acknowledgement of his existence was permitted. The Crimson Angel was to become a ghost story, a rumour, nothing more. But stories have a way of spreading. Over the following months, reports began to filter back from the most unlikely sources. Escaped slaves from Commorragh spoke of a red angel who had freed them, who had torn through Dark Eldar defences and opened paths to freedom. Kabbalite warriors whispered of a crimson shadow that stalked the lower levels of the Dark City, hunting hunters. Archon Vraesk put a bounty on Kal-El's head, promising wealth and power to anyone who could capture or kill the intruder, but the bounty went unclaimed. On the shrine world of Blessed Catherine, the survivors began to pray to the Crimson Angel alongside the Emperor himself. They built a small shrine in his honour, decorated with crude paintings showing a figure in blue and red, cape spread like wings, standing between the innocent and the darkness. The ecclesiarchy tried to suppress the worship, declaring it heretical, but the people persisted. They had seen him, had been saved by him, and no amount of official denial could erase that memory. Fischig asked me once if I thought Kal-El was still alive. The Dark City was a labyrinth of infinite cruelty, I replied. The Dark Eldar were masters of torment who had been perfecting their craft for millennia. No mortal could survive there long, but he wasn't mortal, Fischig pointed out. Not really. He was something else, something this galaxy had never seen before. I looked at my old friend, seeing the hope in his eyes. Hope that maybe, somehow, Kal-El had survived. That somewhere in the depths of Commorragh, he was still fighting, still saving people one soul at a time, I supposed, I said slowly. That if anyone could survive the impossible, it would be him. Years passed. I continued my work for the Inquisition, hunting Xenos threats and heretical cults across the segmentum, but I kept one item from Ferrum 7, hidden in my private chambers where not even Fishig knew about it. A crystalline information storage device from Kal-El's escape pod. It contained recordings from his father, Jor-El, explaining Kryptonian history, technology and philosophy. I watched those recordings sometimes late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Jor-El spoke of a future where his son would be a bridge between worlds, where Kryptonian wisdom could guide human progress towards something better. He spoke of hope, of kindness, of the belief that people, given the right example, would choose to be their best selves. Perhaps, I said to the recording one night, his son found a way to fulfill his dream after all. Not by being a bridge between Krypton and Earth, but by being a light in the darkest place in the galaxy, by proving that hope can exist even in hell itself. The recording didn't answer, of course, but I like to think that somewhere Jor-El would have been proud of what his son had become, not the weapon we tried to make him, not the destroyer he feared he might be, but a protector, standing eternal guard in the one place where protection mattered most. Case file 4077, Sigma remains sealed by order of Lord Inquisitor Torquemada Coteas and the Ordo Xenos. But across the Segmentum Obscurus, stories persist among the common folk slaves in the Dark City speak of a red angel who breaks their chains and guides them through impossible paths to freedom. They say he appears when hope is lost, when the torments have become unbearable, and he offers a simple choice: follow him to salvation or remain in suffering. Imperial Guardsmen whisper of a protector who appears when all hope is lost, who stands between them and death when no one else will. They say he wears strange clothing of blue and red, that he moves faster than the eye can follow, and that his eyes glow like the Emperor's own wrath. On the shrine world of Blessed Catherine, pilgrims still visit the small chapel dedicated to the Crimson Angel. The ecclesiarchy has given up trying to suppress the worship, accepting it as a minor folk tradition as long as the Emperor remains the primary focus of devotion. The paintings in that chapel are crude but heartfelt. They show a figure descending from the sky, capes spread like wings, standing between civilians and Dark Eldar raiders. In every painting, his hands are raised not in violence but in protection. His expression is not of rage, but of determination. Perhaps Kal-El, last son of Krypton, found what he was searching for after all, not Earth, the planet his father intended for him. Not peace, which this galaxy cannot offer, but purpose, a place where his power truly mattered, where every soul he saved was a victory against the darkness. The Imperium teaches us that hope is the first step on the road to disappointment. We are told to expect suffering, to accept that the galaxy is cruel and uncaring, to find strength in endurance rather than optimism. But I think about Kal-El sometimes, about what he represented. Not a hero in the classical sense, because this galaxy has no room for classical heroes, but something else. A reminder that even in the darkest times, even when every choice is terrible and every victory Pyrrhic, there are still those who choose to stand against the night, not because they expect to win, not because they believe it will change anything, but because standing is itself an act of defiance, because choosing hope, even when hope is foolish, is the most human thing we can do. I don't know if Kal-El is still alive in the Dark City. I don't know if he's rescuing slaves one by one, or if he fell centuries ago to the combined might of the Dark Eldar. The webway is timeless, and years pass differently in Commorragh than in real space. He could have been dead for decades, or he could have just begun his crusade. But I choose to believe he endures. I choose to believe that somewhere in that nightmare city, in the depths where even Vect's power doesn't reach, there is a red angel standing guard, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, offering hope where hope should not exist. Because if Kal-El taught me anything during our brief time together, it was this: the galaxy doesn't need more warriors. It doesn't need more weapons or more brutality or more efficient killing machines. What it needs, what it has always needed, are protectors. People who remember that behind every statistic, every casualty report, every calculated sacrifice, There are actual human beings who deserve to be saved. I am Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn, and I have seen horrors that would break lesser men. I have ordered Exterminatus on worlds I was sworn to protect. I have condemned billions to save trillions. I have made every terrible choice this galaxy demands. But I have also seen a being of incredible power choose to sacrifice everything, not for the greater good or the tactical advantage, but simply because people were suffering and he could help them. That, I think, is what a hero truly is. Not someone who never fails, never compromises, never makes mistakes, but someone who, when faced with the choice between what is easy and what is right, chooses right even when it costs them everything. Kal-El chose right, and if that means I failed as his teacher, as his guide into the brutal realities of the 41st millennium, then I accept that failure gladly, because this galaxy may not deserve heroes. But Emperor knows it needs them. This has been Case File 4077 Sigma, the Kryptonian incident. The records are sealed, the evidence classified, and the subject presumed lost. But the legend endures, passed from soldier to soldier, from slave to slave, from world to world. Somewhere, in the darkest corner of the galaxy, a red angel stands watch. And as long as he stands, hope endures with him. Subscribe to this channel for more classified investigations from the Imperium's darkest archives the Emperor protects. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, so do his angels.